All right, everybody, this is lesson 4, the Turing machines, in your History of Computers section of our course. So your discussion, what are your thoughts on the following quote? Feel free to jot some things down. I look forward to hearing or reading what you write. Sometimes it's the people who no one imagines anything of do the things no one can imagine. Just jot down some ideas of what you think that may mean. Alan Mattheson Turing, born June 23rd, 1912. From London, England, just like Charles Babbage was, that we learned about a few lessons ago. He is the father of computer science. Turing is one of 2 children, and he had a brother named John. His father was a British man, but was part of the civil service in India. His mother, Ethel Sarastoni, was the daughter of the Irish chief engineer that was building the Indian railways. So, his father being over in the civil service, his mother, living in India with her father who's building the railroads over there for the Irish. His parents meet over in India. Alan's family was most known for their famous uncles. His father's brother, H.D. Turing, was a master fly fisherman, and his mom's brother was a famous physicist in Ireland. So, 2 different types of skills, but having a pair of famous uncles can only help, build your resume here in terms of your intelligence, roundabout. Although his parents lived in India, they returned to England for the birth of their sons. However, both of the boys were left in London, and their parents returned to India to finish their work. Turing and his brother were then fostered in various English homes where nothing and no one encouraged expression, originality, or discovery. So, him and his brother in and out of foster homes across, England. They don't get that, help from their parents in terms of education. Ooh, sorry, I missed one there. His parents returned when his father retired from the civil service. Turing was 14 years old. So, imagine spending the first 14 years of your life without your parents, then they return home. Science for Turing was an extracurricular passion, and he first showed this, love for science with chemistry experiments. He was given and read a popular book called The Natural Wonders Every Child Should Know, and this developed his passion for science even more. His mother was very concerned about Turing's passion for science. She believed that since he solely focused on the subject, that he would never be accepted into public school. Given this time period, you had to apply to public school, you had to demonstrate that you were a well-rounded, knowledgeable child to be, entered into these schools. So his mom had a legitimate fear that he would only have, knowledge for science. He wouldn't be as well-rounded as he needed to be accepted into school. Despite this, he was entered into the Sherborne School, but the headmaster warned that if he is to solely be a scientific specialist, then he is wasting his time at public school. That's because Turing's demonstration that he provided to the headmaster, the board, was a science demonstration or experiment. During Turing's time in school, he befriends another student by the name of Christopher Morcom. The two would push each other academically and intellectually. However, Morcom dies suddenly from illness in 1930. This inspires Turing to dig deeper into physics and spirituality, where he questioned how the human mind, and Christopher's mind in particular, were embodied in matter, and whether it could be released from matter by death. These thoughts, this concept, is the premise and the basis of artificial intelligence. Okay, so he is driven to investigate these theories, with the hopes of maybe bringing his friend back in some capacity. Turing eventually ends up being accepted into Cambridge, into King's College at Cambridge, Okay, so we have another Cambridge man just like Charles Babbage. So he gets accepted in 1931. Unlike his old schools, he finally entered a world that was more encouraging to free-ranging thought. The special ambiance of King's College gave him a first real home. It's the first true home, the first real home that he's ever had in his lifetime. Remember, he spent the first 14 years without his parents, and him and his brother bounced around from foster home to foster home throughout England. Turing studied very hard, but in his spare time, he did not enjoy literary circles that most people participated in. So, if you go to Cambridge University, education is your passion, and even in your free time, you're reading books, you're studying, you're conducting theories, experiments, and Turing didn't do that. Instead, he enjoyed rowing, running, and later on, sailing small boats. So he's very well-rounded in terms of, knowledge, athletics. Here he is. Let's see if I can blow that up a little. Turing receives a distinguished degree with honors in 1934. He becomes part of the British Fellowship of King's College in 1935, and he ends up winning a Smith's Prize in 1936 for his work on probability theory. With such high credentials, he seemed to be on course for a successful career as a mildly eccentric King's Don engaged in pure mathematics. However, his uniqueness of mind drives him in a direction that none could have foreseen. You're going to start to understand what they mean by his uniqueness of mind when we watch the movie on Alan Turing over the course of the next few classes. We're going to do some a fun activity next class and then watch a movie about Alan Turing after that. Turing spends a brief period in America studying at Princeton University. However, he makes his way back to England and begins working in the government code and ciphering school. So this code and ciphering school is basically them trying to decode hidden messages. World War II breaks out, and Turing begins working with his team to now decode German messages intercepted by the military using their computer algorithms on a machine called the Bohm. These German codes were called Luftwaffe signals. Without Turing's contribution, World War II was projected to have lasted an additional 2 years, and 2 million more lives would have been lost in the war if that war had extended another 2 years. Those were the projections. The Turing machine. Turing's three-headed monster of logical instructions, the action of the mind, and a machine containing both in a practical physical form was his definitive contribution. So he creates a machine that's coded with instructions. It thinks like a human, okay? And it contains both of these things in physical form, meaning a giant machine or a very early onset of a computer. The concept of the Turing machine is like that of the formula or the equation, that there is an infinite number of possible Turing machines, each corresponding to a different definite method or algorithm. What that means, I know it's a lot to comprehend, is that given the time period, there was a machine, or any machine that existed only performed one task, one thing. What he wants his machine to do is much like our modern day computers, that it's one machine that can do an infinite number of things. One machine for all possible tasks. This universal Turing machine embodies the essential principle of a computer, a single machine which can do any well-defined task by being supplied with the appropriate program. It embodies the crucial 20th century idea that symbols representing instructions are no different from symbols representing numbers. Turing creates these concepts out of his mathematical imagination. So he comes up with the true idea of a computer. Alan Turing was almost uniquely in possession of three key ideas. His concept of a universal machine, one machine for all tasks. The potential speed and reliability of electronic technology. And three, the inefficiency in designing different machines for different processes. His fourth idea, however, is that the universal machine should be able to acquire and exhibit the faculties of the human mind. Like we said, a lot of his theories are the basis and the premise of artificial intelligence. So, Turing creates this machine. Him and his team basically bring about an end of World War II. They save millions of lives. Like we said, going back a few pages, it was projected that if the war had continued for 2 more years, 2 million people would have died in war. 2 million more people. Turing's machine prevents this and brings an end to the war. So Alan Turing is a war hero. He ends up being arrested and goes to trial in March of 1952. He gets convicted of gross indecency. He ends up being sentenced to 12 months of prison or therapy. Now with a criminal record, he could never again be able to work for the British government. Turing ends up being found dead in his home. His body was poisoned, and trace amounts of a poisoned apple were found in his system. Still, no one knows if this was a suicide or a murder. He was 41 years old at the time of his death. Okay, by the early 21st century, Turing's prosecution for being homosexual has become infamous. In 2009, the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown ends up speaking on behalf of the British government and publicly apologized for Turing's utterly unfair treatment. 4 years later, Queen Elizabeth granted Turing a royal pardon, and all British people who were convicted of the same crime, living and deceased. So, although Alan Turing is no longer alive to, witness his royal pardon, the government publicly apologizing for what they did, he still has something put in his name that kind of honors and acknowledges the mistakes of the government's past and kind of brings a little bit of justice to himself and all of the others convicted of gross indecency just like him. And here's one interesting thing that I thought I would show you guys, if I can blow it up. Let's see. Nope. I don't know if you could see it, but on that picture here, it says that he is the father of computer science. This is on his tombstone, by the way. Father of computer science, mathematician, logician, wartime codebreaker, and one of the most important things of all that I thought was interesting, that he puts victim of prejudice directly on his tombstone. Very powerful stuff. So, like I kind of hinted at before, Alan Turing is a code breaker, right? He's trying to break signals and codes that the Germans send in secrecy. So next class, we're going to take a look at breaking some codes ourselves. And then over the course of the next several days, we're going to watch a great movie that came out about Alan Turing called The Imitation Games. Okay? Don't forget to submit your summaries to me about Alan Turing and the Turing